Greetings, Exiles. GZ here. Today I wanted to do what is a bit of a build diary on my Forged Frostbearers Necro that I've been using to farm not only the Tier 17 ambush strategy that I put up a previous video on. If you missed that one, you can check it out in the description below, but also Feared, Tier 17's Endgame Atlas in general. Been performing very well for me. Actually starting out here with a 90 quant Feared just to show you a bit of what the build is capable of. And as we're going through this, I'll tell you why Forged Frostbearers. If you've never played them, if you didn't get a chance, they actually haven't been around since Crucible League. The primary reason you'd want to use these guys is because they have little lobbed ice mortar. You can support them with greater volley and they will overlap. They're one of the few skills in the game that actually will overlap in shotgun. So while greater volley in Path of Building looks like a damage decrease, it actually gives you about 400% more damage, which makes these guys super easy to scale. Now you can get access to these boyos just by doing one of those Verisium nodes, or by heading on over to the Spectre channel, Global 6666. Somebody there probably has one in their Spectre pool. Minion players are usually pretty friendly about sharing the non-purchasable Spectres. So now that's out of the way, and you've seen how they perform in Feared. How do they perform in other content? Uber damage is pretty respectable. It's no MP build, but I'm sitting at around 5 million Uber DPS right now, and the damage is full uptime. As long as you're close to the boss, the minions will be attacking the right target. I wouldn't recommend doing Uber Exarch on this character, as the minions will blow up the balls in your face, and nobody wants that. It's by no means invincible in Uber content. It's not really built for that. One of the main defensive layers of the build is block, meaning that large single slams will still take the build down if they're not blocked. I'm constantly surprised to find the list of things growing that I can actually tank. Like, I tanked a beam in this fight. It can reliably tank the beam that he targets on the ground. Overall, I would say that this build is capable of doing Ubers, but it's definitely not the highest damage out there that you could get. It's not purely a boss killer, it's more of a jack of all trades. Boss killing just happens to be one of those trades. And moments after being surprised at what I'm able to tank, I of course get one shot by this. I still come back and kill him though. They map at a pretty decent rate of speed. The addition of greater volley and all of the attack and cast speed that I'm getting alongside convocation linked to automation means that my minions are constantly being repositioned to my location, spamming out a bunch of high damage frost balls. It does put a little bit of a dent in the visual clarity side of things, but as I'll get into in just a minute, the defensive layers of this build mean that you don't usually need to see what's going on in regular mapping content. Certain Spectres do scale with gem level, damage-wise, and Forged Frostbearers are actually one of them. It's because their mortar counts as a spell, so it scales in the same way that a spell skill gem would. With all of the plus levels that I have fractured on my wand, from my chest, my amulet here, and from my helmet, as well as a 21 raise Spectre, we end up with a level 30 raise Spectre, which is quite a bit of base damage for them to work with. You really don't need to go that high though. You start seeing some serious diminishing returns at around level 25, as that's when you're allowed to raise 3 Spectres from just your gem. I also have an additional 4 from Wraithlord, 1 per Ghastly Eye Jewel socketed in the item, and then +1 from Death Attunement for a total of 8. Each of those Spectres is lobbing 5 projectiles due to greater volley, and they can all overlap. And then I'm just getting as much generic minion damage and attacking cast speed as I can. I've got it on 2 large clusters here with 12 passives. Same thing here, minion damage, minion attacking cast speed on both of the rings, and on every Abyss Jewel that I can manage, getting some flat cold damage and more attack and cast speed. Defensively, the build relies on Chaos Inoculation to make us immune to chaos damage. I'm using Incandescent Heart to turn 25% of the elemental damage taken from hits into chaos damage, meaning that we just ignore that amount of damage. A combination of Mistress of Sacrifice and Bone Offering, alongside an Aegis Aurora, means that we are block capped for both attack and spell block. Speaking of Aegis, that +5 max cold res doesn't go to waste in this build, as there's a combination of additional maximum cold resistance on some jewels, Purity of Ice, and Melding of the Flesh, take me all the way up to 87% max all res. You can get this up a little bit higher if you want. I have not elevated the maximum cold res on my gloves. I also keep permanent uptime on Bone Offering through a trigger socketed spell when you use a skill wand, socketed with Desecrate, Bone Offering, and a low-level Forbidden Rite. We can't take chaos damage as we are Chaos Inoculation, but it still counts as getting hit. and when combined with an Enduring Composure cluster, every time you cast a skill, you're cycling between casting Desecrate to summon a corpse, Bone Offering to consume that corpse to give yourself and your minions a bunch of block, and Forbidden Rite, saying that we've been hit recently to generate endurance charges. My primary recovery comes from two things: the energy shield recovery on block from Aegis Aurora, but also the leech from Bone Barrier, which says that 1% of damage dealt by your minions is leeched to you as life. Well, I'm a CI build, so I don't care about life leech. We can come over here and grab Ghost Reaper, leech energy shield instead of life. Great thing about that is it actually works for your minions. Now, Minion Leech by default bypasses Cannot Leech on maps, as your minions leeching to you is not the same as you leeching from monsters, so you can still leech normally. However, mods like Reduced Recovery Rate of Energy Shield, if pushed above 100%, can disable that leech entirely. We come on up here to the Leech Mastery and grab 10% of Leech's Instant. That stops our recovery from being disabled by Cannot Leech mods, as well as Reduced Recovery Rate of Energy Shield mods, as well as being fantastic with as many Leech instances as this build has, as each of our minions is going to be hitting about 4 times a second with 5 projectiles each, so about 20 times a second. Overall, I'd say that defensively this build can stand up to most things in the game. As long as they're hit-based, it does have a bit of a weakness to dots, and when there's nothing to fight, nothing to leech against, or nothing to hit you to generate your energy shield back from Aegis, you might find yourself getting whittled down. If you're doing a lot of content like that, I would recommend something like a Vol Discipline, just to keep you topped up during those encounters. So my wand really isn't anything special. I purchased a +1 to level of all minion skill gems Fractured Convoking wand, and then just rolled Essence of Fear on it until I hit a decent attack speed roll. And all I needed past that was an open suffix for trigger craft. As for the chest, the only mod we actually care about is the elemental damage taken as chaos, and that one is a fixed mod, so you don't actually have to worry about that roll range. You could also try and get a high base percentile or explicit armor and energy shield if you really want, but the most important thing that you want to look out for is a +2 to socketed minion gems. You can get this pre-corrupted and unlinked for very cheap, and then use tainted currency to link it yourself. I was told that I got pretty unlucky with my tainted currency usage, and it still didn't cost me that much, maybe a couple of divs. The 50% reduced extra damage taken from crits is not necessary, but immediately after I crafted my own with tainted currency, I took this chest into the temple, and well, I just ended up landing +2 to level of socketed minions and reduced damage taken from crits. What the is that? What the actual is that? I suppose I got kinda lucky. For the amulet, I went for a replica Dragon Fangs with +3 to all raised Spectre gems, on top of being ideal for scaling minion base damage, as well as helping you reach that level 25 raised Spectre breakpoint for one more Spectre. It's just a great problem solver. It really softens the requirements of a lot of your other gear. Order of importance for the secondary stats, I would say, are definitely attribute requirements, then reservation efficiency, then resistance. Before you can afford something like that, you can definitely just head on over to trade and grab a +1 to level of all skill gems, either a corrupted rare, or looks like an Ashes of the Stars is actually a bit of a surprise to me. The quality of all skill gems on an Ashes would actually be fantastic for things like Sniper's Mark, making enemies take more projectile damage, Convocation for cooldown recovery rate, and Bone Offering for additional block. So let me tell you about the rings. This one's just meant to fix my attributes, bought a Fractured Strength. Bone Ring, the implicit doesn't really matter, but this type of ring can roll minion modifiers, and we really want that minion increased attack and cast speed, so I crafted this one, just spammed Dex Essences on it until I hit attack and cast speed and an open prefix to craft minus total mana cost. The other ring is a little bit more expensive. This base type, I actually had to pay a few divs for one that wasn't mirrored. So this says that if it's in your left ring slot, your minions take 15% reduced damage. The Gloam Ring also does roll minion mods, so once again, I spammed this one out with Strength Essences until I hit that attack and cast speed, ended up lucking into a Lightning Resistance roll as well to make my gearing a little bit smoother, and then once again, open prefix for minus total mana cost. For my gloves, I started out with a pair of Paladin gloves fractured with Intelligence. I got a very high roll on mine for a high price, but you can drop it by a few points and pay about 100 chaos for the base. And then I spammed on Deafening Essence of Woe for flat energy shield until I hit a high percent roll. I ended up lucking into hybrid flat energy shield to make the base energy shield on these things even higher. Once I was happy with the prefixes, I locked them with a prefixes cannot be changed craft on the bench, and then took them over to the Harvest Bench and did Reforge Ellie. And the general idea with the Harvest Reforge is that you hit a high resistance. Now you do have to be a bit careful when doing this method of acquiring a resistance with gloves. There are 3 elemental suffixes that you can roll, but on gloves specifically there are also elemental prefixes. So if you don't have full prefixes and you Reforge Ellie, your chances to get a resistance on the gloves are cut in half. So ideally you want to have the prefixes already full, as prefixes cannot be changed does not stop a mod from rolling in that slot. If you do low roll when you reforge your resistance, don't fret, you won't have to redo your prefixes. You can go ahead and do prefixes cannot be changed again if your suffixes have not filled up, and you can reforge as many times as you want. If that Harvest Reforge does fill up your suffixes, you can come over here and use an Eldritch Orb of Annulment after making sure that Eater of Worlds is the dominant implicit, and it will go ahead and remove a suffix deterministically. Since you're at a point where you don't care about the suffixes yet, you just want extra room to be able to craft on a metamod and go ahead with a Reforge. You can think of this as a bit of a crafting checkpoint where your prefixes are done, you don't need to worry about them anymore, and you can Reforge as many times as you want. The process for crafting the boots is exactly the same. Fractured movement speed, Essence of Woe until high % armor and energy shield, and then elemental reforge. I got very lucky with an X-Slam for an additional lightning res on this one, and had an open suffix for even more res. If you are doing this exact process for crafting the gloves and the boots, be aware that by rolling energy shield essences, you are precluding the flat armor from being able to roll on these, and if you would like to have armor as well as flat energy shield, you should instead roll with dense fossils until you hit that same outcome. Ideally, fill up prefixes with as much defense as you can, and then just continue on to the Reforge Ellie step. Now let's talk about Eldritch Implicits. On the gloves, the most important thing is the max cold res, as that contributes to your max all res via melding of the flesh. Increased effective marks makes enemies take additional projectile damage from Sniper's Mark, which is a good source of our damage anyway. On the boots, Bone Offering has increased effect, can make capping your block easier, and chance to avoid elemental ailments I went for, as it combines very nicely with the chance to avoid being shocked within the Darkness Enthroned. You don't need a perfect Darkness Enthroned, 98% is the one that I decided to go for, as it got my chance to avoid being shocked up to about 83, combined with the chance to avoid elemental ailments implicit there, and a Storm Shroud here, gives me 100% chance to avoid elemental ailments. Darkness Enthroned is great for fixing problems like this with Abyss Jewels. Additionally, I have a chance to avoid bleeding fracture, which equates to about 93% chance to avoid bleeding, combined with a chance to avoid bleeding tattoo on the tree here, for 100% chance to avoid bleed as well. And with as many jewels as this build has, you can easily find a spot for a Corrupted Blood Cannot Be Inflicted on you implicit to make you immune to that as well. The rest of my Abyss Jewels, I'm just focusing on getting minion attack and cast speed as a primary stat. All of my non-fixers also have some additional minion cold damage, but you really want to focus on that speed, as the minion levels give them most of their base damage. Using some of the ones in my hat to fix up my attributes, give my minions some leech so that they can sustain. A small amount of minions have a chance to hinder enemies on hit with spells is great as well, as that will slow them down and keep them in place. Storm Shroud for elemental ailment avoidance. Impossible Escape to take me over here for armor, energy shield, reduced extra damage taken from crits. Block cap with Sanctuary and some extra all res. I'm using one Unending Hunger here. Spectres have a 50% chance to gain Soul Eater for 20 seconds on kill, which can really speed up your mapping and allow your minions to ramp. You can get a second one of these if you want, but as it didn't help with my single target at all, and I felt like 50% chance was enough to see them gain Soul Eater regularly, I just stuck with one. The next jewel is Melding of the Flesh. You really want to try and aim for a -4 to all maximum elemental resistances. It's going to set you back about 4 or 5 divines, but you really want to be getting the most benefit out of this as you possibly can, especially because you're going to need to contend with the minus to all elemental resistances. Even if you get a perfect rolled one, that's still -70 to all. To that end, my large cluster jewels are focused on getting minion damage and attacking cast speed as a priority, but also all res just to counter that melding res penalty, and some flat energy shield is nice as well. Same thing here, minion attack and cast speed, all res, and energy shield. If you really want to go all out, you can try and craft one up with effect for the last prefix, but I didn't get that far in the build and I felt like it was going to be way too expensive to be worth it. Also have a small cluster here with Enduring Composure. For the Watcher's Eye, I decided to go for the Consecrated Ground you create while affected by Zealotry causes enemies to take 10% increased damage. I'm already using Zealotry for the 15% more spell damage that it grants to my minions when they're near me. Fortunately, this works favorably with minions, with their spells actually creating consecrated ground at the location of the enemy they're hitting, and the increased damage affecting their spells as well. I'm currently not benefiting from the additional PDR while affected by Determination, as I don't have a Determination aura myself. What you can do, however, is pick up a Perfect Guardian Turtle Spectre, drop one of the Forged Frostbearers for it, as it gives a Determination aura, as well as the turtle just provides 5% PDR on its own, so not only will you be getting a bunch of extra armor, but with this mod, you'll be getting 10% physical damage reduction while you're near your turtle. Now for my 2 rare Cobalt Jewels, I'm making use of the new plus to maximum cold res mod. I'm also aiming for energy shield and minion damage, and I got incredibly lucky with this one with the reduced effect of curses. If you find it troublesome to trade for these jewels, what you can go ahead and do instead is set up a trade search with your desired stats, and then a count 1 of any maximum resistance of any type and value, it doesn't matter, and then take it on over to the harvest bench. So for this one, I picked up an energy shield and minion damage one, but it has lightning res, which I don't care about. So you can just go ahead and do lightning to cold. It's a very small amount of life force to widen your search range substantially. But let's say, for example, that you picked one up that has energy shield and minion damage, but it's +1. You can actually use this trick to reroll it within its range without having to divine it. Since maximum resistance on jewels only has 1 tier, you can take it in and swap it between 2 different resistances until it lands both the type and the value that you desire. So the section for the passive tree I don't think requires a whole lot of justification, except for maybe this weird thing down here. I messed around with this tree a lot. I love using regret orbs, and I feel like this is probably the best tree that I could come up with for this build. You can path up top instead, but you don't path directly through as much energy shield, and then you do have to anoint Decay Ward. These lead up nodes to Decay Ward also do help the minions cap their attack and spell block, and you really do need Decay Ward. Them leeching on their own is not going to be enough sustain for them. Giving them capped block and recover 2% of their life when they block is very strong. You also won't as effortlessly path by these 2 jewel sockets. I guess a few other key things that I could say is that Indomitable Army is sleeper hit. Moving while bleeding doesn't cause minions to take extra damage, on top of additional physical damage reduction is very powerful, as PDR is a stat that you can't get very easily for minions. The pathing over here serves a few purposes. We get some more mana reservation efficiency, some extra good minion damage and cast speed, armor, energy shield. We also get an extra maximum endurance charge and jewel socket, and more importantly, we get the ability to tattoo some extra attack block as well as bleed avoid, because in the entire rest of the tree we actually don't path through any strength nodes. Mystic Bulwark is actually where I'm getting my mana reservation efficiency mastery, and it also gives me some spell block as well as mana regeneration, which in combination with those minus mana cost rings really do help keep the mana up. I also found that since I was already pathing this way for Arcane Focus for more energy shield, I could take the extra 2 points for Arcane Will, which put me above a threshold where I can actually more reliably use my triggered spells and my curses and everything that I need to spend mana on. It does also give a little bit of mana regen, which when combined with the mana regen from Mystic Bulwark, puts us at about 60 a second, which means we only take 3 seconds to recoup back up to full mana. A little bit of intelligence scales the energy shield as well. Last thing is I'm tattooing a lot of my intelligence nodes with reduced effective curses on you. Intelligence is actually a very important scaling factor for energy shield, so you can do this as well, but just don't get rid of too many of your intelligence nodes. Try and get the reduced effective curses elsewhere if you can. You can roll it on jewels like I did here, and you can actually get some on the Pantheon as well, Soul of Yugal. And that one's just good because it makes your minions take reduced reflected damage. So things like reflect mods on maps are actually not that bad to run. If you're doing feared rotations like I was, the reduced reflected damage taken can really help when you're doing the Uber Itziri portion of the fight so they don't accidentally kill themselves to the mirror. I didn't have a good way to path to it, but it's too powerful to give up, so I'm just anointing Spiritual Command. Since sources of minion cast speed are almost always sources of minion attack speed so as not to be exclusionary, and minion cast speed is such a big factor for damage scaling in this build, it actually gives us 3 additional attacks per second for shield charge, which is a quality of life that cannot be overstated. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or it helped you out in any way, please leave a like, subscribe for more, and consider joining the channel as a member if you'd like to show your support. Also, I'm live almost daily over at ds_Jeezy on Twitch, playing mostly Path of Exile, listening to some music. Come and hang out, it's a good time. As always, I'm Jeezy, and I'll see you in the next one.